Hello and welcome back everyone to the third and last day of Anocracy Conference 2020. Early this year I read the book Unorthodox by Deborah Feldman. Many of you have probably also read the book or you watched the Netflix series which is based on the book. I was fascinated how Deborah underwent a fundamental change by questioning her guiding principles, values, language, basically everything. I was talking to the Anocracy team and we wondered if we could learn as a society as a whole from an individual transformation process like the one Deborah went through. So we decided to invite Deborah Feldman to Anocracy 2020 to go into a conversation with an extraordinary artist who's an expert on the transforming emotions into actions, but also on defining the relationship between individuals and collectives. So you will hear now a pre-recorded session between Deborah Feldman and the dancer, choreographer and director of Sasha Waltz and guest, Sasha Waltz herself. We started into the conversation by asking Deborah to answer the following question. How did you as a child or teenager relate to the word alternatives? What did the word alternatives mean to you when you were in your teenage years? Please enjoy the pre-recorded session.
That's an interesting question. I don't want to disappoint with my answer, but my first instinct was, to think back if I ever viewed the world as a set of alternatives. And I have to be honest and say that I didn't, or not in the way that I think you're getting at, because it's one thing to be exposed to alternatives. It's another to grasp them as possibilities. And by this, I just mean my community represented the only possibility. And in the books that I read secretly, certainly I was presented with alternatives, but I did not grasp them as possibilities until the point where the one possibility that was presented to me suddenly became untenable. And then I had no choice, in a sense, but to look for another one. And certainly you can say that the alternatives I was presented with via literature helped to feed this new possibility, but not only. And possibilities are something you have to build by yourself. It cannot be given to someone, cannot be offered.
So could it be that I was thinking about where is this very initial impulse to search for something different? Is that a very, very deep curiosity that you're born with? Is that something maybe in the contact with your grandmother appeared that you observed secretly or were very attentive to? Something that you observed in your surrounding, maybe behind the first degree of the world that you were born in, but that you observed like little holes, little gaps. Was it the deep curiosity or?
Well, I mean, it's a question I ask myself very often, partly because it's a question I notice my readers ask. Like, it's presented to me very frequently because everyone wants to know the secret. Everyone wants to have the explanation as if there's some kind of like magic formula. And, I ask myself, is it genetic? It's impossible to say. Is it due to my environment? Maybe, but by being able to analyze the development of my sense of curiosity over time, how does my sense of curiosity right now compare to that sense when I was a child or an adolescent or a young adult? And I think, this is my theory, I think that unhappiness can breed curiosity. I think that human nature is to seek out happiness, and I think that it goes against human nature to accept unhappiness as an irrevocable state of being. And so unhappiness creates the kind of like breeding space for curiosity to grow, because in a sense, what we are curious about is what has to change for us to be happy. And I think that as I have grown closer to the state of happiness as we know it, not the state of joy or euphoria, but the state of contentment of, you know, in German, there is this lovely verb that you can't translate into English. It's called einpendeln. It's the movement of the pendulum that finally finds its perfect equilibrium. I think this is how I would describe human contentment. And I think that as we approach this point, we do feel our curiosity lessen, because curiosity is that forward direction toward happiness, toward contentment. That's sort of my theory. I don't know. I mean, you strike me as a curious person yourself. I follow you on Facebook. We met for the first time a few years ago at a conference that you organized, which was called Zuhören, or listening. And I was exposed to your ideas there for the first time, but I followed you online ever since. And I know that you feel very comfortable sharing, you know, your emotional reactions to current events. I can tell that there is a very sincere and passionate interest in everything that is happening around you, and you know, the changes that are happening in our world. Whereas I notice myself more and more withdrawing, as if like I used up all of my political curiosity in a sense. So maybe I was hoping to hear from you, you know, the secret method to sort of reawakening that, because I do feel myself losing that curiosity.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you use the term of unhappiness. I would also say that for me, definitely from the beginning of my childhood, I was also very curious and agile, but also very introvert. And an awareness also of a disbalance, or not being right at the right place in your body or in society, or in a situation that was already early in school like this for my life. And the moment when I started to dance, I felt something changing, something different. And around 15, 16, I then had a very crucial experience, and where I deeply felt that everything that I was lacking or searching, or let's say, like, you don't feel well in your skin, everything was coming together. And it was in a workshop where they were teaching a lot of physical awareness training. It was kind of a contemporary dance training, but very, very, with a lot of awareness techniques. And for me, this moment, I decided this is, from here I want to start. I want to start from the body. I want to start from the inside, and the awareness of who we are, where we are, and then find the expression out. And over the years, I have developed that. I mean, first as a dancer, but at a certain moment, there was also a transformation. And I made a change from the dancer, from the performer, from the one that interprets in your own body, with your own body, into the choreographer that works in a community, in a collective, and has to communicate with words and with the body what you want to say, where you want to go. And I think this was quite a changement, and this was forced quite naturally, that I felt when I'm dancing and I'm creating, I don't understand the situation anymore fully, and I want to understand it. So I started to step out and look at the work, and I felt suddenly it's so much clearer. So it must be like when you fly up above and you see the world from above. I felt kind of this situation when I started to only choreograph and not anymore dance inside. And the next step, I think, was becoming a mother. And you have experienced that too. And I would very much like to share that also with you. But I just want to take these 3 steps to go to your question. That was for me quite a crucial transformation again. And I think in pregnancy, I think we feel quite incredible to what transformation the body and our skin is possible, yeah, to transform our form and our whole being. We are almost another person in time of pregnancy, I would say. And then again transform, and I'm now at the stage where I'm turning into menopause. So I think this is again a very big transformation. And I think during this time, when my children now got bigger, I felt more and more I'm going out, because before I was trying to handle my work, my family, the children. I was not able to do even more social engaged work. And now the children are bigger, I feel I want to reach out more, and also my experience, share that with the public, share that with society, share the tools that we have developed in our art form, that maybe it can help. And that was the initial idea of Zuhören, when we were confronted with the crisis of people, refugees arriving. And for me, it was like an initial need to say, let's do a workshop with the bodies, with unaccompanied minors, and give a sense of where they are in their body. How do you arrive here on the ground? And how do they feel? How do they get in contact with their inner life? Because they maybe had traumas, they lost their ground, literally. So this was for me a need. And that came not necessarily from curiosity, but I think for wanting to be able to share this knowledge, or I don't know if it's knowledge, more like this practice that we have. And so for you also, you have a child, and I was really wondering if that was part of that reinforced you to take a further step, or would you have taken the step also anyway, like to step out of your born situation?
No, I think it's fair to say that I would not have decided to take any major risks with my own life if I had not had a child. On the other hand, it's very unlikely that I would not have had a child. Coming from where I come from, it's just very difficult for women to get through life without bearing children. I mean, unless you can really claim you're infertile, and even then your life is quite difficult. So there is no woman in this community who is going to willingly not have a child if she can, because it becomes essential to your survival. And it's for a long time it was the #1 priority to have a child. And then of course, once the child comes into being, and this is already the case during pregnancy, certainly the feeling that there is another presence in your own life, or an extension of your own life, then the question of risk changes. It's not so much about the self or one's desires or one's ego, but something completely external, and also very hormonal, I think, because I have this theory that I was floating around on happy hormones for the first year after my son was born. I was like really high. Like, I don't think I was ever that happy or untouchable in my life and in that year. And I really find it strange, because actually as a person, I more tend to being melancholic. So it's like, how is it possible that for 1 year I floated around in a cloud? But I did. But in terms of the body, I do describe the moment of giving birth as the moment of re-entry to the body in my book. And it's certainly the way I experience it, because everything about my education and my experiences up until that point had taught me to just disconnect from my body, to abandon it to its fate in a sense, and to exist as a self only in one spirit. And this, I mean, in my case, I think it's interesting that I entered pregnancy technically a teenager. So the physical development also of a teenager. And during pregnancy, there was not just the transformation of woman to mother, but also of teenager to woman, which, you know, it was sort of accelerated, which is terrifying, by the way. It's and it's very fast. It's very sudden, and afterwards you are nothing like the woman you were before. And I don't remember being a woman that wasn't a mother because I was a child, then I was a teenager, then I was a mother. I did not have this phase in between that many women today have, which is, you know, what it's like to be in your 20s and to sort of ease your way into ideas like pregnancy and motherhood, which means that I never got a chance to get to know my body before it was transformed. Mm-hmm. And to this day, I think I struggle to catch up to it. Mm-hmm. But also, you know, the way that my culture, you know, in general views the idea of relationship to the body. I mean, there's this really interesting part of the costume that men wear in my community. It's called a Gürtel in Yiddish, which is from the German word Gürtel. And it's a silk knitted belt that the men tie around their waists during prayer, because the idea is to separate the physical from the spiritual. Everything from the waist down is the physical body, and everything from the waist up, the heart, the soul, the mind, belongs to God. And if we can just achieve this separation, we can achieve spirituality. And this is an idea that I was raised with, but I was also raised with the same, you know, related belief that women are imprisoned by their physicality. They're imprisoned by the nature of their bodies. They cannot simply separate and connect to God, because everything about the woman is physical. Every part of the body is engaged in something earthy, in something earthbound. And it's a feeling that is transmitted to you, you know, from a young age, and it's certainly connected with the idea of sin and sinfulness. And I remember, you know, I went to an arts college where, you know, there were theater programs and dance programs and art, you know, like drawing programs, really every kind of art form. And it wasn't that I went to this school and I had this clear idea of, oh, I'm going to do writing because writing is my strength, but rather all art forms were, you know, cut off from me in my childhood. And the only one I was able to achieve realistic access to was literature. And then once I was at the school, and I remember sitting in on a dance class and thinking, well, that's never going to happen. Like, I'm not going to be able to catch up enough, not just in terms of knowledge and training, but simply in terms of connection to one's physical self, simply in terms of coordination. Just for me, it was a tremendous achievement at the age of 25 to learn how to ride a bike, to learn how to swim, to learn how to move. Really, just to walk is the way that I walk today has nothing to do with the way that I walked then. And so that was off the table. And I remember wanting to do theater, and my professor really wanted me to do theater, but it was very clear, I have a child, and I'm not able to commit the extra 40 hours a week for rehearsal. And it made sense that I'm going to do writing because that was the one thing I had a background in because of my access to literature during my childhood. And it also felt like something I could do without my body, in a sense, something I could do in a disconnected state. And I think that this is still the case. So in a way, I'm a writer by default. I'm a writer because everything else was too far off. And I go out and I seek the arts till today, just the way I did as a child, with a sense of illegitimacy, with a sense of trying to interpret what this art is telling me, even though we don't share a cultural context. So every time I'm going to see a play or to hear a musical performance, I'm still absorbing it in the same context as I did as a child, which is the idea that it's a foreign language. Mm-hmm. And however, I have to say that as a writer, I benefit very much from the input. And it's something that I've been missing very sorely in the last months, that I'm not able to receive creative input, because I do take this creative input from theater and dance and music, and I do translate it in my work. It does impact my writing to an enormous degree. And in that sense, sometimes I still feel like that child that's looking for alternatives, right? Looking for material from which to build possibilities.
There's one aspect that, or actually two things that come to my mind that I would like to, one to ask and one more to say what I find quite interesting. There is a pragmatic point of view also in finding your way, that you say you need to get to terms with the situation that you're in, and this was the choice then that you decide to become a writer within these limitations that you explained. I think to be pragmatic is also, I think, a very, very good tool. It can be a very good tool. And I think women sometimes are more pragmatic, I observe, to take a bigger scale, and maybe there was your child always in your mind frame, because you had to take care, you had to consider that your life works together with your child. And I find that very interesting, especially in if we envision change, that we are keeping a sense of reality, that what is possible, and we go step by step. And sometimes, I mean, we are also guided intuitively. I don't know, I feel in my life, there's a very, very deep intuition. But this pragmatic sense, I know from myself, certain things I just can't do. And or I make a clear choice, I can do my work, I want to be there for my children, but I cannot run 2,000 conferences and public talks and this and that and the other. Some things I need to do, I do, but I very clearly made a focus. And so this is just something I wanted to grasp, because it's not something just that we are floating and we have all these callings, you know. Somehow the calling is growing inside, and it walks along guidelines that are also limitations, and how we deal positively with limitations, how we change them into something, I would not say positive, but to incorporate them and make them part of your life in a way that it works for us. This I feel a lot in the arts like this. I feel I constantly create myself limitations that I need to solve. And the other thing that I want to ask you again, back to your childhood, thinking of where does this spark come from? Is that imagination, were you a child that within your world were really imagining also, like even in your inner self, maybe something that is not even, you couldn't even have words for, but maybe something like a very specific atmosphere, like to speak in a language from my side, when I'm trying to create a scene or a certain part, sometimes I have a very clear sensation and almost sometimes a foggy image, I would say. And I try to move along these gray lines that I see, and like this, I catch the scene. And is there something like a vision or an imagination that helped you to create the path that you took?
Yes, definitely. I mean, my childhood was on the surface very, very boring. I had to spend really very long hours in one place. I mean, either behind a desk, listening to my teachers either teach us about sin or about prayer or about Jewish history. Really just a lot of wasted hours spent doing nothing and receiving no input and no stimulation, and a lot of quiet, lonely hours at home. So certainly if I wasn't born an introvert, I developed into an introvert. And I think that the instinct of every introvert is to invent like a universe in your own head where everything goes and there are no rules. And so I do remember being very young and having just like stories happening in my head, and with very rich and detailed settings and characters and dialogues, you know, without understanding at the time that what I'm doing is in a sense creating stories in my head, but really just as a means of enjoyment, and entertainment, to the point where it got so automatic that I was living more in my own fantasies than in reality. And I think to this day, I still use it as a coping mechanism, because I'm still more comfortable to cultivate a fantasy world than to very fully and intensely engage with reality, by which I mean like to go out there into society and engage. It's very difficult for me because I trained myself from an early age to be my own world, you know, to be the sole inhabitant of my universe. And this is the only thing I really know how to do well. On the other hand, I agree with you. I think that the secret to happiness, to individual happiness, is to adapt our dreams to ourselves, to adapt our dreams to who we are, you know, how we are made, how our lives, you know, look like. Because the biggest unhappiness is to have a dream that is completely incompatible with yourself, with what really makes you happy. I mean, it's like, let's suppose I might have a dream to become an actress, which is something that, of course, I think a lot of young women dream about, you know. And I remember when I was looking at the theater program at college, it's like, oh, what would it be like to be an actress? But the truth is, I would be miserable as an actress, because I'm very introverted, and I prefer to spend a lot of time alone. And I have terrible social anxiety, and I hate being recognized on the street. So it would be, what a terrible dream. I mean, imagine if I had pursued it, I would be so unhappy. In a sense, what I did earlier on was not just pick the practical solution, but I acknowledged who I was as a person and what dream I needed, not just what I wanted. And I think sometimes our desires are really separated from our needs. We just, we cannot reconcile the two. And so I think the greatest gift I have learned over time is to desire the things that are good for me. I don't know if you can identify with that.
Well, I guess it's finding a balance to wish for something that, because to strive forward, what we started off, the curiosity, into something that is beyond your limit, is on the one side, but at the same time you need to balance with a reality. I think it's a fine line between.
I worry because I think I'm very aware of how much society influences our wishes, you know, our goals. I know there's, based on the community I come from, that if you're surrounded by people who all value the same thing, you feel a very strong pressure to value the same things too. And this is why it got even to a point with me that I wanted to get married, that I wanted to have a baby. Not because I really wanted these things, but I was completely disconnected from what I wanted, because so much input, you know, was coming from all around me about what I should want. And honestly, I don't see it, you know, happening that differently here. I think that, yes, our society is complexer and the spectrum of possible desires is certainly wider, but I am getting a lot of input also in this world about what I should be wanting. And very often all of those desires are completely incompatible with who I am as a person. And it would be impossible for me to chase those desires and then actually be happy. And I see so many people kind of blindly going down that path of chasing the desires that society presents to them as acceptable possibilities. You know, and so and then I think, well, there aren't really alternatives if you know, if you can only move within this spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly true in this digital age, I think even more. And I think it's a very, very big danger. I mean, observing the children, my children, how they grow up. And I feel we are definitely heading into an era where it's very hard to stay in contact with yourself. And not be taught what you should even feel like, or what you should look like, or what you want to be. So it's very hard to teach them a deep, to stay in contact with who they are very, very deep inside, and to trust that. I have one thought in my head still, if it's okay for you to ask, or it's more something that's in my head. It's about a strength of a woman. And for me, maybe the crucial moment to feel that is birth, to see the power that we have, that the ability of accepting or taking also pain and working through pain, breathing through pain to bring life. And that this pain is also a constructive pain. It's accepting pain as something that is creation, that creation needs to come. And that we are aware, us women, that we have this power. And how this is, for me, it can be a tool for transformation if we make us aware what we are possible, you know, what we always have in us, and like how can we transmit that to society?
Well, you know, I think that that is also one of the reasons why women were seen as threatening for so long, because it's that constant transformation. And you know, if you're from Buddhism, we get this really interesting saying called suffering is change. I do think that there is an innate human resistance to change, and that women represent change because they constantly go through changes and are the cause of changes. To me, yes, it is certainly this, if anything at all, that makes my womanhood clear to me. Because, and I say this because I think gender is really, really a very difficult topic, because I think it's difficult to feel one's gender really concretely. I think unless that sense of gender is challenged, it's very hard to define what manhood or womanhood means to a person. I think that we have a lot of theories and ideas, but I think it is really, really difficult to feel it. And I think that women certainly have this advantage in that they go through the transformation of their bodies, and this leads to then the transformation of themselves and of their views on the world. And I think that that is both empowering and also overwhelming. I think it is also frightening for women themselves to go through, especially depending on the circumstances in which they experience these changes. But yes, it is a powerful metaphor for the way that even when we are not ready for change, change still barrels towards us. Change happens independently of us, and we adapt. Wir holen nach, right? We catch up. Certainly that is the way that I experienced it in my own life. I didn't feel ready for any of the transformations. They happened anyway. I adapted to them. And I think that if I look back at every single individual change, certainly they acted as positive propellants. They caused me to achieve a new and improved life phase and mode of expression, which I would otherwise not have been able to achieve or even imagine. And I think that is the exciting thing about change, is that change can precede imagination. Before we can even fantasize about something, it can happen, and our fantasy has to catch up.
Participants, I hope you enjoyed this very personal conversation as much as I did. Every one of you who is in the Zoom will be thrown now back into breakout sessions for 10 minutes. You will be meeting 3 to 4 other people, and we ask you to elaborate on the question if you could relate to what you just heard in the conversation between Deborah and Sasha, and if yes, in what way. Maybe you want to put a focus on the role of arts and culture for change, or you want to elaborate on the quote, "Unhappiness can breed curiosity." You decide. See you back here in 10 minutes. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Anocracy 2020. For the official reflection to the conversation between Deborah Feldman and Sasha Waltz, we have invited the historian Hedwig Richter, who's also in our scientific council at das Progressive Zentrum. Hedwig just recently published the book Demokratie, eine deutsche Affäre. Together with Hedwig Richter, she will be in a conversation with Heinz Bude, who's a professor of macrosociology at the University of Kassel. Among several other books, Heinz Bude has published in 2019 a book called Solidarität, Zukunft einer großen Idee, which translates to solidarity, future of a great idea. We're looking forward to hear now Hedwig Richter and Heinz Bude. It's a session we have pre-recorded, and you will listen to it for about 30 minutes now. Please enjoy.
Hi, great to meet you.
Hi.
I just want to start with one idea, and I think you can then go on thinking about it. What I found very interesting, or one of the many interesting points in this dialogue between Deborah Feldman and Sasha Waltz, was that Deborah grew up in a world with no alternatives. And I think that the modern world is really, it's very significant for the modern world to have alternatives. Peter L. Berger said that the transformation to modernity is from fate to choice. Yeah. And it is so fascinating to see a world where you, within the modernity, within New York City, where you have no alternatives. And I think this is perhaps a very good point to reflect on. And for me, it's not only the question how to make transformation possible, but how is this world, how does they manage, these Orthodox Jews, to prohibit transformation, how do they make it possible that there is no change? And perhaps if we think about that, we can also think about how change is quite easy in a modern world, and how we can make it possible.
Yes, I would agree in that sense. I would say we have a lot of little alternatives in our world. And of course, especially if you look back on the last 10 years, we have a lot of life chances, more life chances than we had 10 years before, especially in Germany. Sometimes it seems to me that we are coming out of a paradise, looking to the last 10 years.
Yes, and I agree.
And I would think we are now at the end of that paradise, and we have to think how to go on to future. But one thing I would like to mention: how could the perspective of Deborah be that much narrowing in her lifetime? And her answer was she was dealing with something spiritual. That was a spiritual thing that narrows her world. And maybe her result is giving up a spiritual thing, defining my own life, and going back to bodily experiences, a kind of experience that is more in the world and not nothing what is out of the world. Mm-hmm. And I would like to not agree to this idea. I would think we are living in a world in which future doesn't promise us anything, but future is something that is threatening us. And that is I think that's the main problem we are now in. Future is not a field of openness. It's not a field of life chances and alternatives we could grasp, but it seems to be a field of things coming to us, coming near to us, and we are not really able to react to it. And if future could be a field of life again, an open field of life, I think there must be something like a spiritual or metaphysical aspect. What does it mean to believe in future? Or more to your point, what does it mean to believe in democracy? What does it mean to me? What do I really believe in if I believe in democracy? What do I really believe in if I believe in future? And I think my last thing, I think we are going out of a time to think of complexity, because we find a lot of people who think that the argument of complexity is a lie and a betrayal. And I think we have to go to an elementary thinking about what is democracy? What does democracy mean for me? And what does future mean to me? Is it only my personal future, Or is it a kind, do I really have an idea of collective future? And I think we have honest to ourselves. And if we take this answer as an answer by heart for each of us.
Okay, there's a lot I agree, but I will pick the point. I absolutely don't agree with you. This is the point about this apocalyptic future, this no future, this not to be open for the future. And I think as a historian, if we look back in former times, pre-modern times, but also in 19th century, but also in the 1970s, people pretty much had the same fears for the future. It was the Cold War. People were so afraid for the atomic war. And of course, they had very, very good reasons. And even then, they were afraid of destroying the environment. And I think this is, we are not very well informed about history if we think this is something new, to be afraid of the future and to not be open for the future and to live in fears. So I think this is not really something new. We always have to deal with that, and especially Ulrich Beck with his Risikogesellschaft. I think it's a bit absurd to think that we live in a world full of risk, and people, let's say in the Middle Ages, didn't live in a world full of risk. They had much more risk. They were not sure if there was enough food. They were not sure if God will be back the next day. They had much more reasons to believe in an apocalyptic future than we have in our quiet, sure environment, in our quiet in our Wohlstandsgesellschaft. We have enough to eat. We don't really have to worry about what to wear the next day, what to eat the next day, and so forth.
Yes, I agree, but I would question, if we look at the succession of generations after, let's say, World War II. Let's concentrate on Germany. I think one could say that we have past war generations that believe that the worst that can happen is behind us. You know, you're getting through your life after 1945. What was behind you was a lost war and a genocide that was a burden for the Germans. And now you needn't to be optimistic. You only think the worst that can happen is behind us. So whatever we do, it will be better. Whatever we do, it will be better. But now, I would say we have generations born, I would say, I think the threshold is age group 1975 or something like that. That, I think for these generations, it is a very existential impression that if there is something worse that can happen, it's before us and not behind us. And I think that's a difference of our time. That is, we have a sort of a kind of inversion of fear.
Yeah,
but I think that's one of the big problems of our time.
Okay, I really disagree on that, but I think surveys show that people are they're confident with the situation, and I think this is a typical discourse of intellectuals, that there's so much fear and that the world totally changed. But I think what we can see from surveys, and this is what we know about people, is that they're quite, for them the world is quite okay. And I think what we see with Fridays for Future, of course they are afraid of what will happen to the environment, but this is a very powerful yes to the future. other than my generation, we were boring. We didn't really care about future, of course, not all, and of course this is too broad. But I think this engagement of the millennials, this is much more a commitment to the future. But I would also like to speak about what you said about complexity of democracy, if this is okay for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and I really think that the point of populists is to say, let's make it more, let's make it easier. Democracy is easy. Or Trump always says, it's so easy, it's so easy. But I think liberal democracy is really a very, very complex topic. It's very complex that liberal democracy grows and that it exists. It's not very likely that there is this history of democracy, and so it's also a very complex institution with checks and balances, and we have a parliament, we have a president, we have the Supreme Court, and so forth. And so I think it would be really a problem if we would say we have to make it simple and this will be the solution for the problem for democracy.
No, I don't think that I need to be simple, but I think the problem of democracy is an elementary problem. And there's something, I think it could be helpful, at least it could be helpful to ask yourself, what is, if you say, yes, I believe in democracy, I think we have people in the world that don't believe in democracy.
Yes, yes.
And I would say, okay, I do. And then I would ask, oh yes, what kind of belief is that? Let me answer that question. I would say, in the first part is the worth of the individual. If you believe in democracy, you strongly believe in the worth of the individual.
Yes.
That means that anyone could come and say, have you ever thought of that? And I would say, no, I haven't. And democracy is a kind of dealing with this elementary problem that anybody could come and offer me an idea of the world I have never thought before. And I believe that is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the second thing, that on the other hand, I believe in the power of community. You know, that I think if people are working together, if people are doing something together, it's a good thing. And I believe in it. I believe in the worth of the individual, and I think there is a power of the community, and that is democracy about. And I'm ready in 2 minutes. And the third thing is, I believe in the importance of knowledge. Democracy is of knowledge.
Yes.
That knowledge is a thing we should bother.
Yeah.
We should think about, and there is an importance of knowledge in democracy. That doesn't mean that everything is led by knowledge. Of course not, because there could be an individual who says that is completely wrong what you're saying, and then have to think about it. But I think there is an importance of knowledge, and at least I personally believe in the possibility of education. Education is a really big thing for democracy. If you think that people could change their mind, that you could think something new, that there is the possibility of transformation, then I believe in democracy.
Oh, I totally agree. Yeah, absolutely.
I think we have to say that, because we have people who don't believe in it.
Yeah.
We have people who don't believe in the community.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people who don't believe in the importance of knowledge. And we have much more people, they don't believe in the possibility of education.
Yeah.
So there's a real struggle situation about democracy. If you take it as your personal thing, that you say, no, it's nothing to read in books. It's a question of my personal life.
Yeah. I think this is the big project of enlightenment, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I also, and it's not very fashionable to believe in enlightenment, whatever it is, but it has a lot to do with education. I absolutely agree. And I think that, to come back to Deborah Feldman, I think her life is so fascinating, because what made transformation possible was, to a huge part, was education. She went to the library, and she right. Read books, and she thought about it, and she's really and this is a story of enlightenment, very old-fashioned. She saw new worlds, and she saw that there are alternatives, and that there is knowledge, and with the knowledge and with education, she can take those alternatives and change the world. And a second point why I absolutely agree is that I think that democracies really live out of critique. And critique is, of course, you can change, you can educate, you can change people, you can convince them. And knowledge is important, is valuable. And all this comes together. So you can see there is a mistake, and you can change the mistake, you can critique it, and you can make transformation with the help of education and with the help of knowledge.
And sometimes I think I should look for people who don't believe in these four things, and to talk to them. And I would say, okay, you don't believe in the worth of the individual because you think the Chinese way of solving problems in our world is a better idea. And believe me, there are a lot of people in the leading groups of our country who don't believe in this doctrine of the worth of the individual. They would say, oh, the individual, those are the veto makers, and they're disturbing the problems of being of putting leading positions in the world market and all of these things. And I would say, okay, what is that? What are you believe in if you don't believe in the worth of the individual? And you know, I think we sometimes look for dangerous encounters and ask people, do you really believe in that? And even if I talk to journalists, I know journalists who don't believe in all these four points. And there are maybe sometimes important journalists in our country. That's an interesting thing. An interesting experience I've made.
Yeah. This I also think that a few weeks ago, the Zeit asked me, what did we learn? Is there something we learned from history? And I strongly believe, of course, we learn from history. We can see after 1945 that Europe learned a lot from history. Yeah. And I think if there would be one thing we learn from history, it's men's or women's dignity. It's the dimension view, and this is really the essence of why, what is society about, or what society should be about. Dignity of human beings. But I also think that democracy has many different and roots, and that it is not only knowledge and not only this a project of enlightenment, but that connected to it is the project of enlightenment, but there is also a very important point about emotions. Mm-hmm. And that, for example, the emotion of sympathy, of empathy, is very important for the development of democracy and for the dignity of men and dignity of women. And I think this is also very interesting about Deborah's Feldman's life, about recovering the emotions and recovering the importance of sympathy, and that it is more than just a collective sympathy within her community, which doesn't allow individuality and individual emotions.
Do you think there is something spiritual in democracy?
It's a very good question. I think that religion is much more important for the history of democracy, especially the Christian religion, but perhaps I don't know enough about Jewish religion for the development of democracy. Mm-hmm. And well, it belongs to how you define spirituality. How would you define it?
I would define it in that way, that there is something other in the world that is able to decenter my idea of the world. Spiritual experience is an experience of decentering. Mm-hmm. And I would say democracy needs sometimes an experience of decentering. Mm-hmm. You always think you are the center of the world. And what I think is best, and I'm educated, I'm rich, I achieve a lot of social positions, and that is my lesson. Mm-hmm. I would say no, there is something decentering in life, even if you're getting over 50 or 70 or something like that. You will realize you are not the center of the world.
Yeah, yeah. I think I always like the idea that when politicians are sworn in, that they say, "So help me God," and mainly because it shows that I'm not all powerful. I need help from somewhere else. I'm not alone on my own. I'm not the strong individual who can manage everything. The anti-Trump kind of. It's really like, so help me God. There is something else. I need the help from others. And yeah, I think there is this idea what you're talking about decentering oneself.
Yeah, and that is, I would say, it's an interesting thing. If we are not. It's not a register having at hand, like religion, to have this experience. Mm-hmm. And maybe in modern times, you have to do something to get to this experience of decentering. You could read Jacques Derrida. All his history is about decentering, mm-hmm. and opening, decentering and opening. That is his idea. And of course, he's Jewish thinker. That is very important. Okay. Mm-hmm. Very important. And I was educated with Jewish thinker in Berlin at the FU. That was Jakob Taubes. That was a very important thinker. He was always about maybe the Messiah is coming to that door. And if you believe that, you could think in a very different way in the world. And then maybe is a thing that Deborah and
Sasha Waltz,
yeah, maybe missed, that my idea of myself is always an idea of the world. And that is, again, a problem of democracy. It's not my world, that's a common world I'm living in. And what is my attitude, what is my habit to that experience that I'm always living in a common world. And the idea of myself is always an idea of the world. I came to this idea when I wrote about solidarity. And I found if you don't have a conception of a common world, you are not able to be a solidary person.
Yeah, it makes absolutely sense to me. May I ask you a question about spirituality and democracy? Mm-hmm. So, do you think that Deborah should take some part of her spiritual world to this world? And could you make it concrete what you mean about that spirituality is important for democracy? Could you give an example, or because I think it's so interesting and I did not think a lot about this point yet.
I found that there was an interesting TV production on her book directed by Maria Schrader. And I read the book and I saw these films and the series, and I thought in that artistic transformation, the idea was Berlin is a paradigm.
Yes, yes, yes.
You're getting away from this Williamsburg world, you're getting to Berlin and everything is fine.
Yeah.
And Berlin is an absolutely unspiritual place in that conception.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I began to think about it. I'm living in Berlin, and Berlin is a wonderful city. I believe in Berlin, and I would like to define Berlin more than a lot of people define it. I'm ready to give a definition of Berlin. But I think Berlin is lacking spiritual dimension, and that's a problem of Berlin. It has, like Heiner Müller, he knows about the spirituality of Berlin because that was the experience. If you come to Berlin, the deaths are giving you place. He knows what the war is. He knows how Berlin is defined by history, the histories of wars. And that is, in a way, a spiritual idea. And I would say, yes, even democracy needs spiritual thing or a spiritual idea. That, I'm Catholic, to be true. I don't think that we all should be religious. We should only think, what does it mean that we have a collective horizon? And why do we really believe that an individual could correct me, could be able to correct me? And I would maybe accept it, even if I'm not really convinced, but I see, oh yes, these are really, really important points. I'm hesitating to take them, but I have to. And I say, okay, yes, it could be. And that is, I would say, at the end, I think, yes, if I accept this point, it's a better feeling being in the world after that, being by someone else.
Yeah.
And that is a big, big experience and a very important, and I would say it's a spiritual thing, being connected by something.
Okay. That's very, very interesting. I think at least at some points you can connect spirituality with art, and
Right.
it is, and I think much of Deborah Feldman's spirituality went into art, or especially in this dialogue with Sasha Waltz, you could see it, and there come much together, spirituality but also emotions. And the historian Lynn Hunt, she wrote a lot about that the creation of human rights was very closely connected to art and to people learning through art the emotion of empathy. And perhaps, and this was very, very important for democracy, to have this emotion of empathy and to respect the other human being, and to think beyond the own ego, to decentralize oneself.
So that could be the end of our talk. Yes, that's the performing of human rights. What does that mean? Is there an aesthetic thing, a religious thing, and maybe an inspirational thing in it? Is democracy still a source of inspiration?
Yes, yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Even though this was a pre-recorded session, I would like to warmly thank Hedwig Richter and Heinz Bude for joining Anocracy 2020 to do a reflection on the conversation between Deborah Feldman and Sasha Waltz on the overarching question whether individual transformation can teach us something about societal transformation. Every one of you who is right now in Zoom, may I please ask you to use 2 minutes of your valuable time to fill out an evaluation. The link will be sent to you right now in the chat. You know, especially during this digital conference, it is very hard for us to tell whether you like what we do. So this would really help us a lot to get a little bit of feedback. Thank you very much. We will go into a break of 15 minutes now and then be back here in the live stream to hear just another vision sprint by Nashra Balagambala, which will be reflected by Emilia Roig. Enjoy your break.